our studio B. And of course, we're here outside the KBC Gardens. And of course, our conversation will revolve around the ongoing visit by President William Ruto to China. And of course, we'll be helping you understand what exactly is happening in China. Well, from mega road and railway project to rising trade volumes, the relationship between Kenya and China has grown into strategic in Africa. When Kenya launched Vision 2030, the roadmap to economic transformation, it needed resourceful partners to fund high-risk infrastructure. Enter China, willing, capable and ready to finance projects, marking the beginning of a relationship rooted in infrastructure, trade and diplomacy. Wim Mojanga has more details.
Kenya established diplomatic ties with China in 1963, but it was in the 2000s that the bilateral ties deepened, driven by two key initiatives: the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation and China's Belt and Road Initiative. As Kenya turned its gaze towards East, under the late former President Mwai Kibaki, it marked a shift away from traditional Western allies, embracing new partnerships defined by infrastructure expansion and concessional loans, as Kenya sought to move away from commercial loans, which are deemed too expensive. Today, projects like the Standard Gauge Railway, Nairobi Southern Bypass, Thika Superhighway, and the Nairobi Expressway have transformed transport and trade, connecting Mombasa to inland economic hubs. But these gains have come at a cost. As of March 2023, Kenya had borrowed $6 billion or 780.6 billion shillings from China, which is about 64% of Kenya's bilateral debt stock and 17% of total external public debt, according to data from the National Treasury. China is also one of Kenya's top trading partners, but the trade imbalance is in favor of the Asian country. President William Ruto's visit to China is seen as a chance to renegotiate trade, diversify exports, and push for greater market access for Kenyan products. This comes amid a shift in global dynamics. The trade between China and the United States is reshaping supply chains and geopolitics. Wim Mojanga for Prime Edition.
Well, that is Wim Mojanga, of course, giving us a breakdown of the relationship between Kenya and China. And of course, what is the way forward? I mean, President William Ruto is on his third trip to China. And of course, major deals have been signed, from the financing of the Rironi Mau Summit to Malaba Highway, and of course to the expansion of the Standard Gauge Railway line. These are some of the issues that have been discussed, and of course we expect to see the financing of these issues being closed, or this project being closed anytime from now. And this is just about a tip of the iceberg. I have a team in studio who are going to help us understand the dynamics of all things, and of course what is innate for Kenya. I mean, today we have seen President William Ruto signing about 20 deals with his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping. And so the question is, what is innate for China and what is innate for Kenya? To help me in this conversation, I am joined by Leonard Kafafa. He's a policy and geopolitical expert. He is on my extreme left. Thank you very much indeed, Kafafa, for joining us. And right in the middle, we have Ambassador Ngovi Kitao. He's a diplomat and governance expert. He's also joining us tonight in this conversation. Balozi, asante sana for your time.
Thank you very much.
And of course, on my immediate left, we have Liu Wanli. He's a deputy editor-in-chief at Xinhua News Agency, Africa Bureau. Thank you very much, Mr. Liu, for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to start with you, Mr. Liu. For the last 3 days, President William Ruto has been in China. What do you make of his trip to China? This is the third one.
Yeah, this is the third visit of President Ruto's to China. And President Ruto's visit to China is the first African leader to visit to China since the FOCAC which was held last year in Beijing. And this is a very important moment for Kenya and China. And we know from the press release that China and Kenya has elevated their relationship to a strategic cooperative partnership. And that means in the future, the countries will deepen their cooperation and they will explore more economic opportunities for both of the people in the two countries. And also, as our media houses, we will have the opportunities to expand our cooperation with media organizations such as KBC. Yeah, that's very important for us.
I want to hear from you. I mean, you know, Kenya and China, they have had diplomatic relations since 1964, 1 year after Kenya became an independent country. And so we have seen the relationship between the two countries grow to become one of the most important in Africa. Now with the elevation of their partnership, what is it going to change, and how significant is this new partnership?
I think China and Kenya established their diplomatic relations in 1963. But before President Ruto's visit to China, we have an interview with the president. And in that interview, the president said that China and Kenya had established their relationships since 600 years ago. Yeah, we have business convoys, businessmen based in Kenya, and Kenya has businessmen that's sending their goods to China at that time. So I think during the past several hundreds of years, the people in the two countries have established a mutual trust that is so deep that we can trust each other in the future. Yeah, for example, the Chinese government and the Chinese enterprises, they have made huge investment in Kenya that built massive infrastructure and promoting people-to-people exchanges. For example, we established 4 Confucius Institutes in Kenya. That is has great significance, to advance the people-to-people understanding, between the two countries.
Mr. Liu is talking about, the relationship between Kenya and China, and it goes back, several thousand of years. I mean, it goes back all the way to the Qing dynasty, when Chinese traders used to come to the port of to Lamu, to the island of Lamu, where they used to do trade. But I want to hear this from you, Leonard. I mean, when you look at in the last 12 years, Kenyan presidents have made about 8 trips to China. Their president, Xi Jinping, is yet to visit Kenya. Why is this the case?
My view is that it's been a gradual deepening of the relationship between both countries, between China and Kenya. Initially, of course, Kenya had an unaligned policy historically. When there was that division between the West and the East, Kenya took on an non-aligned position. But with time, it became apparent that Kenya tended to lean towards the West rather than the East. I'm going to give a historical perspective. I mean, fairly modern history. Then, during the tenure of the late President Kibaki, we began to look east with projects like the Thika Superhighway being partly funded by Chinese money. The relationship deepened further during the tenure of former President Uhuru Kenyatta, where we had the SGR, big ticket infrastructure development project. Then we had the expressway. Now it looks like we are taking it a notch higher, given that President Ruto is the first president after the summit last year, after the African summit last year. As our colleague has rightly pointed out, he's the first president to visit China. He's the first president to visit China following that summit at the invitation of the Chinese premier. And what we also note is that this is, unlike an official visit, this is a state visit. And again, it is a 5-day visit. 5-day visit places a lot of prominence on the nature of that particular visit. It's not like others that are usually truncated, say, to 2 or 3 days. This is a 5-day visit. So there's a lot of significance in that. So my take is that with this deepening relationship over the years, it is quite likely then that we will see the Chinese president visiting pretty soon. Yeah.
I want to hear this from you, Ambassador Kitao. I mean, you used to be the Kenyan ambassador to South Korea from 2009 to 2014. That was about 5 years. And so you come on this platform, with tremendous experience and, of course, a deep understanding of issues in that part of the world. We do not have any other African country that have signed this kind of a partnership with China. Kenya is the first one. Why is Kenya so important to China?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kimani. Let me start from where my colleagues have stopped by saying that the relationship is very historical, it's very deep, going back to the 14th century. And China has been a friend of Kenya and of Africa. Despite that they were here that early and earlier than the Europeans, they never saw the need to colonize Kenyans or to colonize Africans. Something very, very positive, and we are very grateful about that. Then secondly, we need to take note that China started teaching Swahili way back in the 50s, meaning that they were prepared to work with us, to be part of the same community, which is now the current phrase we are using. But as early as 1956, Chinese universities were teaching Swahili. Then in the case of my friend here, he told me, Mr. Liu, that they opened an office in Kenya before we became independent. That's very telling. So why Kenya then? One, is that relationship. Then the other point he raised was that we've had 5 presidents. And if you look at the relationship between China and Kenya during the time of Jomo Kenyatta, it was a very cautious relationship. And we did encounter some difficulties when in 1967 we closed the Chinese embassy in Kenya due to some political misunderstandings.
Yes.
And it was opened again in 1978. Then after that, we had President Moi, who still continued to align with the West, the way Kenyatta was doing. See, Kenyatta had 2 issues. One was an ideological difference and an economic difference. So when Moi came on board, it continued with aligning with the West until the USSR, the Soviet, collapsed in 1991. And then the West tried to put a lot of pressure on Kenya. You remember there were ambassadors here even telling our presidents what to do from the West.
Yeah.
And that is the time now we started looking at China because of its non-interference policy, which was very positive for Kenya. But the real takeoff came with Kibaki. As he said, President Kibaki came with the Look East policy. And he realized that we are not going very far with the West. And that's when he dispatched a lot of us, including myself, to go east to find out why our relationships of 1960s not matured and what do we need to do to make them mature. And that's how we got into China, to Korea, into Japan. Then, when Kibaki did that, President Uhuru came on board. And I think he really went full blast. And that is the time when we signed the comprehensive strategic partnership agreement in 2017. That's when he signed the first framework. And then President Ruto came on board and he has tried to push that further. But what I hear from Xi Jinping is that the enhanced relationship needs to go further than look east to something like look global south, act global south, so that we are a bigger community. So that is how this has transformed.
I want to hear this from Mr. Liu. When you look at the trade between Kenya and China, I mean, it is heavily skewed towards Beijing. You know, last year we saw trade between the two countries jumping all the way to about 520 billion Kenya shillings. But almost 500 billion shillings was China selling its goods to Kenya. From a Beijing perspective, what strategies can we put in place to ensure that the trade balance is even?
Yeah, I think the trade balance is quite important for China and Kenya, and the leaders of the two countries have agreed to deal with it. For example, in the press release after the two presidents, China promised to invest in the industrial parks, to encourage the imports from Kenya. For example, I know the Kenya coffee is quite popular in China, and the avocados and other agricultural products are quite popular in China. And the Chinese government has taken a series of measures to encourage the imports from Kenya. For example, we have China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo, which will be held in Hunan province in June. And this is an expo that at the national level in China, which means that one of the most important expos in China. Mm-hmm. And that expo, a lot of companies from Kenya will go to China to display their products. And we have a series of measures, for example, tax-free measures, and also to facilitate the import procedures at the custom. Mm-hmm. So the Chinese government views this is an important issue and agrees to deal with it by enhancing the investment here and also encourage imports from Kenya.
Very good.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to take a short break, and of course, when we come back, I just want to hear from you. What a lot of people are not realizing is that the Azerbaijan president, Ilham Aliyev, is in China, you know, at the same time with the Kenyan president. But when you look at the global headlines of major publications, they are not talking about the trip by Azerbaijani's president. A lot of them are talking about Kenya and China, you know, and the new trade pact that was signed today. So I'll be coming back to try and find out why is this happening, but that is after the break. I mean, you're watching us, we're coming to you live from our KBC gardens, and of course we're having a great conversation here and trying to analyze the happenings in Beijing, where President William Ruto is on a 4-day visit. And of course, we are back with more stories. Stay right here. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Edition with me, O'Brien Kimani. Our conversation this evening is around the ongoing trip to China by President William Ruto. And of course, we're trying to break down what it exactly means for us and China. Well, Kenya is targeting to secure funding for the extension of standard gauge railway from Naivasha to Malaba border through Narok, Bomet, Kericho, Nyamira and Kisumu counties. The project is expected to open up Western Kenya for investment, enhance passenger as well as cargo transport, as we report now.
Chinese firms have been involved in key infrastructure projects like the Standard Gauge Railway, Nairobi Expressway, and some buildings. Construction of the Mombasa-Naivasha Standard Gauge Railway was completed in October 2019. Over the past 5 years, the passenger service on the Standard Gauge Railway Crescent Madaraka Express has moved more than 10 million people between Nairobi and Mombasa. In addition, cargo volumes on the Standard Gauge Railway have risen to 6.4 million metric tons for the year ended June 2024. However, despite the availability of the Nairobi-Naivasha Standard Gauge Railway, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers says some businesses prefer tracking their cargo due to cost and flexibility.
Naomba uongozi ya Kenya na uongozi ya Uganda wakutane watengeneze hii kitu.
President William Ruto has pledged to secure funding for extension of the SGR from Naivasha to Malaba to reduce the cost of transport and to streamline logistics.
We've had conversations with the President of Uganda, with the President of DRC, with the President of Congo, Brazzaville, and we've all agreed on the need to extend this piece of infrastructure as a means of facilitating trade across our continent and making sure that companies like yourselves who set up in Kenya not only have access to the Kenyan market, but have also access to the East African market and the continental market.
Extension of the SGR to Malaba is seen as crucial for enabling traders transport cargo seamlessly by rail from the port of Mombasa to the Kenyan border, then to landlocked countries including Uganda, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, and Burundi. Ndutamo Kami for Prime Edition.
Well, and of course, one of the deals that has been signed in Beijing is the extension of Phase 2 and Phase 3 of the SGR from Naivasha to the border town of Malaba. And of course, we'll be watching to see when that is expected to start. I just want to hear this from you, Leonard. Before we went for the break, I was talking about the fact that two presidents are already in China. President William Ruto of Kenya and President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan. But many people are not talking about the Azerbaijan trip. They're talking about Kenya. Why is this so?
I think the operative word here is strategic, and I've heard it mentioned several times this evening. Kenya is strategic because it is the entry point into Eastern Africa and by extension to the very heart of Africa itself. I mean, when you look at Kenya, when you look at the SGR, for instance, the way it is envisaged to operate when it is complete, the SGR is going to move through Kenya all the way to Uganda, to Rwanda, and to the DRC. And of course, Burundi as well, South Sudan, covering South Sudan. So that whole area forms what you call the Northern Corridor. And the Northern Corridor is strategic for any investor from outside the continent who either wants to sell or access the markets that these corridors expose, or access the raw materials that can be transported through this corridor out of the continent. So it's strategic. It's very strategic. Opening up the Northern Corridor opens up quite a bit of Africa, and you know Africa is resource rich. Africa is, has, I think, 60% of the world's arable land. It has more than 50% of the world's water resources, natural water resources. It has rare earth minerals that are untapped. So all these things make Africa very attractive, and the way to access this is through Kenya. So that's what, when you compare our president's visit and say the president of Azerbaijan's visit, the importance of the other president's visit pales in comparison when you compare with ours. It's strategic.
Yeah. And of course, as we move on, we'll be understanding how strategic this relationship is going to be. I want to come to you, Balozi. I mean, when you look at a China relationship with Kenya, in terms of debt, I mean, 63% of bilateral debt that Kenya owes to the rest of the world is held by Chinese. When you look at our national debt, you're talking about 691 billion shillings, which is owed to China. With this new project, are we likely to see, our debt to China going through the roof? And if yes, how then do we ensure that we don't tip the scale of the balance?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me pick up from what you said, and especially the strategic position of Kenya. If you compare like Kenya and Azerbaijan, we are already, our trade balance between Kenya and China is almost $10 billion now. And China is exporting to Kenya about 9 billion, while Azerbaijan is about 3 billion. And in Azerbaijan, it's really locked. There's nowhere to go. It's either you go to Armenia or to Georgia and then the Caspian Sea. The other side is blocked by Turkey. But when it comes to Kenya, the world is open. So the debt we are taking is not actually for Kenya, because it's for infrastructure, opening the route to East and Central Africa. We have competition. He talked about the Northern Corridor with the Central Corridor. The Central Corridor is Dar es Salaam. And they have put a lot of effort because they are doing a railway line, an SGR to Mwanza and an SGR to Kigoma to approach Central Africa, but it's a very long route. So the debt will go up, but it is visible. We are able to pay because we are going to generate more income.
And the question has always been, I mean, you see, when you look at the debt that is owed to China, I mean, it's 95% of it goes to infrastructural projects.
Yes.
And so the question has always been, then, as a country, how do we use this expanded infrastructure for trade and for commerce so that we can develop our balance sheet as a country?
Yeah, I think what the question you're asking is that how do we improve the quality and the efficiency of the Kenya-China relations so that we are not borrowing too much money which we cannot pay. And I think you are coming from the background where people are saying there is a debt trap. That is all propaganda. Mm-hmm. That is not true, because we have economies just the way China has, just the way Europeans have, and our economies are at par with the others. So we are not being told by anybody, we are not being forced to borrow. But this borrowing for infrastructure is very, very important, because without that, how do we trade? How do we reach the rest of Africa under what we are calling now African Continental of Free Trade Area? If we don't have this infrastructure, we will not be able to reach them. Now, how much debt should we take? That depends on, we need to assess, like the Rironi-Mau Summit you have talked about. Once that road is completed, what impact does it have on our GDP? Mm-hmm. And that should guide us as to how much we need to borrow and how much money we need to put in a particular project. If I was to go a little bit further, and based on what has been signed today, the 20 agreements, the 20 MOUs, mm-hmm. and that's why I really agree with the two presidents that we've reached a point where we need to look at integrating the systems and the processes. Instead of looking at the Rironi Road or the SGR to the border, we need to look at the value addition by those infrastructures. What we need to do, like right now, say we are fighting so many things, climate change, green energy, and all this. We need to look at a situation whereby we are going to borrow $1 billion based on what has been reported. And remember that China increased the money available to Africa to 50.7 billion, meaning that out of the 54 countries, the most we'll get is 1 billion, which I think has been signed today. So how best do we utilize that money? So we need to have a synergy whereby a lot of things are related. Like, let's take the case of, I saw that there's a collaboration between the railways. So we need to not just go to the railway, but go to the automotive industry together, where we can have a special economic zone. Let me give an example to explain the concept.
Yeah.
Today, in Africa, South Africa is assembling more vehicles than anybody else, about 650,000. Mm-hmm. And that blocks South Africa. Morocco is doing about 550,000. Kenya is doing 14,000. That's an area where now China can come on board on electric vehicles. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do is, say for example, we go to Naivasha, we pick 300 acres. It's not expensive. Okay, China, it's state land. Us, it's money. We buy 300 acres at $50 million. 100 million put infrastructure, okay? Then now we can get the Chinese to bring in technology and to bring in their investment. Like the biggest vehicle manufacturer in China is BYD. It has overtaken Tesla last year. So we get BYD to do an assembly plant. With BYD will be about...
They are moving to Ethiopia. They are setting up a base in Ethiopia.
No, we can do better than that. Mm-hmm. It's about 300 million. Why we can do better than that is that we have lithium for the batteries in Kajiado. Put another 250 billion. Yeah. So with about 1 billion, we are able to start industrialization in Kenya. We have vehicles. In that 300 acre, we have the BYD And we have like 200 SMEs
In that place.
in that place.
And they can occupy the Naivasha SEs.
Yes, and
SEZ.
then they will supply wire harnesses, glass, shock absorbers, radiators. We don't have to import all these kind of things.
And
So
what-
with that
what-
synergistic approach,
Yeah.
then the debt is viable.
What you're simply saying is that China has the wherewithal to
Yes.
turn Kenya into an African manufacturing
Yes.
as well as an industrial giant.
Yes.
I want to hear this from you. I know you also want to react to what Balozi was saying, but even before you react, I also want to hear this from you. Africa, with about 54 countries, Kenya has been picked by China as the first country to visit after the FOCAC meeting. Why Kenya?
Yeah, I think because Kenya is the most important trading partner in Africa, China's most important trading partner in Africa. And when we're talking about Kenya's significance, I agree with our colleague that we focus on the keyword strategic. Yeah, that's why more and more Chinese investment are coming to Kenya. So in terms of the investment and that, I want to also contribute to Mr. Ambassador's view that if we talk about the Kenya's total debt, the debt owing to China is only about more than 10%, about 70% of Kenya's total debt. That is not a higher number, because most of the debt are owing to the international lenders, for example, like World Bank. China about 200 countries within the initiative mechanism, but this one is the flagship project. And with the SGR, we saw the containers shipping from the Mombasa port, and also we see satellite cities outside Nairobi. And also we see the Chinese investment resulted in the Lamu port, Mombasa oil terminals. That means the two countries are building Kenya a regional logistic hub. So with this hub, the Chinese investment and Chinese goods are going to many African countries through Kenya. And this is a huge benefit for Kenyan people.
Very well.
And another point is because the lack of infrastructure is common in Africa. Because, for example, some inland countries cannot have industrial parks because it's quite expensive to import the material from the port to their inland industrial areas. But with SGR and with the expansion project, we can link, for example, Uganda, Rwanda,
Burundi.
Burundi, and other African countries. That means Kenya is the door for Africa.
It's a gateway.
Yeah, it's a gateway. So through this gateway, we can bring the world into Africa. And so that make Kenya very strategic, important.
And I think, when you look at the Vision 2030, that's why the architects of that critical document, are talking about improving access and, of course, the efficiency of the port of Mombasa to ensure that it remains, as a strategic port to the eastern seaboard of Africa. Balozi talked about, some of the initiatives that Kenya can put in place, Kenya and China can put in place, to turn Kenya into an industrial base. China controls more than 95% of rare earth minerals in the world. It's the largest producer of these critical minerals that goes into powering our phones, laptops, electric cars, and so much. I remember in 2014, it was reported that Kenya has trillions worth of rare earth minerals in Shimba Hills. He talked about lithium in Kajiado. We have coal in Mui Basin, in Mwingi County. How then do we partner with China to ensure that we acquire the expertise that is needed to exploit these resources for our own socio-economic development? Leonard Kafafa.
That's a good question. I think we need to basically borrow from what China has done. Unlike other Western countries that have taken 200 years to industrialize, China has leapfrogged a lot of these countries over the last 20 to 30 years. At the moment, statistically, China, the middle class in of the